If I can, I just want to give a little bit of definition for some of you that may be new, just to church and to this whole thing. The bending of knee, it kind of might feel like, man, what is that? What's going on? I just want to point out, we do that normally, don't we? When we get to a place of surrender, when we get to a place of desperation, there's something physically in our bodies where your knees kind of give out and you just kind of fall to the ground and you're in this place of surrender and this place of desperation. And I love this, that the way that our bodies are actually wired is a reflection of our great need for King Jesus. It's our great need for King Jesus. And so when we respond and lift our hands and when we drop to our knees and when we respond to the Spirit of God, it is a response. And here's the deal. Some of y'all get to your knees when your football teams lose. You know what I'm saying? You're in desperation when the Panthers are losing again. I'm in desperation. I just want to maybe just point something out. I brought something with me. I have a hat here today. And does anybody know the symbol that is on this hat? Can anybody shout out the football team that this represents? Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Brandon. Brandon, do you know when the last time the Chicago Bears won the Super Bowl? What was that? That was 85. That's right. Y'all want to know when I was born? 1985. It has been desperation for close to 40 years, just so y'all know. Today we're going to be in a text. We're going to be in 2 Samuel, and we're going to look at chapters 15 and 16, and we're going to work through a pretty amazing portion of the scriptures. And again, I want to make some connections. You're going through the Bible recap, and I love what Pastor Rob is doing here at First Baptist Charlotte, because when you work through the Bible, from Genesis through Revelation, we can't hide from anything, can we? Right? We just got to deal with what the scriptures are presenting to us. And one of the things that I'm so grateful that we're going to look at, and this is just the title of the message here. If you're a note-taking kind of person and you're like, I like to have titles for the messages, it's a very simple title. And the title is Faithful Friends. That's it. It's Faithful Friends. There's this amazing song by Ben Rector. Any Ben Rector fans in here? Yeah, there's a song that says, we can't make old friends. If you listen to that song, you might want to listen to it on your way home. I promise you will think about some old friends, and as you're listening to it, you will be crying. You can say it's allergies, but we know what's really going on. And the thing about friendship is that sometimes the most profound, significant friendships that we have in life happen through the most uncanny situations and circumstances, don't they? Like if you're growing up and you're in elementary school and you're in junior high, you're in high school, we're gonna be friends forever. and then it's the person who you think we'll never be friends. That's the person that ends up following with you for generations and generations. I want to share two of my friends, Matt Peterson and Pete Heiniger. My wife, Brittany, and I had moved to Bellingham, Washington. It's about an hour and a half north of Seattle. And I had gone to work for a Bible software company. And, prior to this move, I think the illustration or the metaphor is I was kind of a big fish in a little pond. Everybody know what that kind of means? Honestly, I felt like I was crushing it. I was doing a great job. I felt very confident in my work and in my ability. And so I get this incredible opportunity to go work for a Fortune 500 massive Bible software company. And I go in there and listen, I'm just going to put my honesty and my pride out in front of all of y'all, okay? I just thought that I was going to become the CEO in a week. I'm like, these people are going to see me. They're going to see how good I am. The CEO is going to get fired, and they're about to put this Indian dude up at the top of the chain, right? I quickly realized that big fish in a little pond was now the same size fish, except in the ocean. And now when you're in the ocean, you got sharks that are around you. And when you got sharks that are around you, you know what you realize what kind of fish you are. And I realized I was a goldfish. Some of you have tried to keep goldfish alive. It's not very easy, is it? It was in this season that I met these two guys, Matt Peterson and Pete Heiniger. And Matty was from Cincinnati, Ohio, and Petey actually was from Chicago, from my hometown. And those two guys were further along in their careers, and they kind of saw me flailing, and they kind of just took me in and started to give me some advice and some help. And on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we would meet right down the street from the office at this local spot, and we would hang out and spend time together and just kind of process life. And within 3.5 to 4 years, we just became kind of the bestest of friends. Another interesting thing about our relationship is, once again, our friendship was rooted in common misery. What is that common misery? Well, Matt Peterson was a Cincinnati Bengals fan, and Petey and I were Chicago Bears fans. You know how good the Cincinnati Bengals are at football? Not very good, right? And so it's this common misery, and life and friendship took place, and this was an amazing season of life. And then we all moved to different things at different seasons, and we would look back often to those seasons and think, man, isn't it so nice to have some friends that could celebrate the highs of life, and then have some friends who are just faithful that could be with you in the very lows of life. As we turn to 2 Samuel chapter 15, we start to see the trajectory of King David as he goes from the heights of his kingship to the very lows of his kingship. If you look with me, what you will notice is that King David has done quite a lot in terms of his life. He has experienced success. He has defeated the Philistines. I mean, he is a warrior king's warrior king, and he has absolutely crushed it. I was talking to Richard as we were walking in, and the interesting thing that I was kind of sharing with Richard is that, what's fascinating about King David is that King David is an incredible leader when he's in the wilderness, when everything is against him. When he has to have true dependence on God, David is crushing it. But there's this interesting thing about King David, that when David is in the safety of the city, when he's sitting in the beauty of the palace, he seems to falter as a leader. He seems to slip as a father. He seems to be a disconnected king. And after years of this kind of slippery living, he had let some things slide. And one of those things that had slid is this son of his named Absalom. And Absalom looked around and was like, you know what? I would be such a better king than my dad, David. And it's really interesting in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verse 6, you see, Absalom would have this practice that when people would be coming to the palace in order to get some help for the things that are happening, and the king was responsible to kind of give the help, right? Absalom would do this wild thing. He would sit out at the front of the palace in the courtyard, and he would ask people as they're coming through, are you going to see the king? Well, you know the king is real busy. You know, the king, he's not really able to be around and to meet your needs. Like, wouldn't it be so nice if there was a king in Israel that could meet your needs, that could ensure that you would receive justice? Verse 6 says this, Absalom did this to all the Israelites who came to the king for a settlement. Notice this. So Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel. The next line is when 4 years had passed. In other words, do you really think that David didn't know what was going on? Of course he knew what was going on. He just didn't do anything about it. And after 4 years had gone about, Absalom, I'll just give you the story, he basically ensures a revolt. It's like, we're about to take this kingdom by force. And this is where we pick up. This is where we pick up the story. We pick up the story where King David is now in desperation because he's like, my son is about to take the kingdom from me. Now, what do we do? And what you're going to find in the next series of verses and chapters is that David is going to come across some faithful friends in some of the most unlikely places. Y'all remember Lord of the Rings? Anybody Lord of the Rings fans here? Yeah? Who is Frodo's best friend? Say it loud. We know you. Sam! Samwise Gamgee. You know, the wild thing about Sam is Sam's always trying to follow Frodo wherever he goes, and Frodo's always like, leave me alone, Sam. But realistically, he is desperate to have Sam near him. There's another interesting parallel story between Legolas and Gimli. Legolas is an elf and Gimli is a dwarf. And just so you know, those two people groups, I guess you would call them, they hate each other. Dwarves and elves have nothing in common. They hate each other. There's a long history of hatred. Fascinating thing is you're reading through the Lord of the Rings, and this is why we love Tolkien. He's a literary genius. Tolkien actually presents these two individuals that should have everything against each other, and they become the very best of friends. It's through a journey, through common bond, through a commitment to a mission and to a vision that they actually find unity and bond and friendship and loyalty. When the world goes, they should have nothing in common. They go, well, we just became the best of friends because we have something in common. If you're like me, you're probably starting to hear echoes of the gospel, echoes of the good news. How in the world could people that are from different places, different ethnicities, different socioeconomic classes, like the world be like, y'all shouldn't hang out, you shouldn't have dinner together, you should have nothing in common. How is it that they are loyal to each other? Well, they're loyal to each other because first and foremost, they're loyal to King Jesus. By the way, when you're reading the Bible has an intention. And the intentionality of the Bible, when we're reading about somebody like King David, is not to think much about King David. It's not to be enamored by David. It's to look at David and go, how does a murderer, a cheater, a person who seems to be an absolutely useless father, how is he also referred to as a man after God's own heart? How is it that David is this figure who's presented to us in the scriptures that's actually intended to point us to the greater David, to King Jesus? What we're going to find embedded in these next two chapters is this beautiful contrast of how David, in fact, points us to Jesus. But before we get there, along the way, I want to just point out about 5 things that we'll find about the characteristics of faithful friends. Here's the first thing. A faithful friend is not motivated by what they can get, but they're inspired by who you are. So David is panicked now. He's like, Absalom is about to come. He's got a whole group of warriors with him. A bunch of my people have turncoat on me, and now we got to get out. We got to run for our lives. And so David, he gathers his people, those that are remaining loyal to him, and he has to exit the city, and it is devastation. He comes and he brings everybody in front of him, and he, sends them all out, and he's walking out, and all of a sudden he sees something that's kind of fascinating. It says in verse 18, while his servants marched past him, then all the Cherethites and the Pelethites and the people of Gath, 600 men who came with him from there, marched past the king. And then verse 19, the king said to Ittai of Gath, which, side note, this is a Philistine mercenary general. Y'all remember who David basically slaughtered, right? Philistines. So here's a Philistine mercenary general who is with King David. It says this, the king said to Ittai of Gath, why are you also going with us? Pay attention to David's perspective of the situation that's around him. He says, go back and stay with the new king, since you're both a foreigner and an exile from your homeland. Besides all of this, you only got here yesterday, bro. The bro is my translation, just if you're wondering. Besides, you only arrived yesterday. Should I make you wander around with us today while I go wherever I can? Go back and take your brothers with you. And then notice how David then blesses this Philistine mercenary general. May the Lord show you kindness and faithfulness. If I'm Ittai of Gath, a Philistine, who knows very well what David has done to my people, I'm thinking specifically here that my goal is to be strategic in every decision that I make. So I should put my lot in with Absalom, shouldn't I? Clearly, he's got the upper hand. Clearly, he's got the power. Clearly, he's going to win this. Like, all the chips are stacked in his favor. That's what our natural expectation should be. In fact, that's even what David knows. That's why David says, listen, you've got 600 people, like, you're going to lead them to their death. You see, David knows what it's like in the wilderness. He lived that life. Some of the kids today would say he was about that life. He knew it. He understood it. He's like, you don't want to do this. He goes, go back to Absalom. It's all good. You're good. We're going to be good. And on top of it all, may the Lord, may Yahweh show you blessing and faithfulness and kindness. And Ittai, he responds in one of the most unthinkable ways. But in response, Ittai vowed to the king. Notice, David calls Absalom king. Why would David call Absalom king when David is the king? We get an insight into David's own confusion. We're getting an insight into David's own anxiety and wondering, am I even the Lord's anointed anymore? You see, David remembers that there was a time in his own history when Saul was the anointed king. But Saul sinned against the Lord. And he was unrepentant in his sin, and the kingdom was stripped from him. And I had this deep sense and deep wonder, is David thinking in this moment, is history repeating itself? Have I got myself into a mess? Now what's going to happen? Am I even qualified to be called the king if the Lord potentially has anointed someone else? But notice what Ittai says. Ittai says, and he vows to the king, as the Lord lives, and as my Lord, the king, lives, wherever my Lord, the king, is, whether it means life or death, your servant will be there. You see, the faithful loyalty of Ittai, it actually amazes David. And in a really interesting way, Ittai actually has more faith in David's call that God has given him than David had himself at that moment. What is a faithful friend? A faithful friend is motivated not by what they can get, but they're inspired by who you truly are. You see, here, Ittai looks and says, yeah, all the chips might be stacked in the favor of Absalom, but there's the sense that just the way David responded, with selflessness, that's the king I want to follow. That's the king who I'm going to put my lot in with. Let me ask you, when you think about friendship, when you think about relationship, what motivates your friendship? Is it transactional? Is it because of what you can receive? Because if that is what motivates your relationships will be shallow at best. In the end, that other person will not be able to give you all that you want. And you will be let down. When you are let down, you will push over that person, sacrifice them as a pawn, as a chessboard, and move on to the next. There's nothing in terms of longevity that is helpful in that context. You see, my best friend in the whole world is my wife, Brittany. She has more belief in me than I have in myself often. And she speaks that truth over my life. When I have doubts about ministry, she has encouragement based on what the Lord is doing in my life. When I'm sure no one in their right mind will ever read any words that I would ever write in a book, she has assurance of the call of God on my life to write for the Lord regardless of who reads or who doesn't. And then says, by the way, babe, of course people are going to read your book. It's cool. The way the world suggests that we should strategically pick friends, once again, is based on what we can get. It's a friendship that is motivated purely by reciprocity. Faithful friends are not blinded by strategic advantage in friendship, but their loyalty is connected to the bond, to the vision, to the character of the person that they are in relationship. The motivation for friendship is based on character, integrity, and the substance of that person. Here's the second thing. A faithful friend is present in the midst of sorrow. A faithful friend is present in the midst of sorrow. They rejoice with you in victory, and they lament and they weep with you in loss. David is leaving, and he's got this host of people that are with him, and some of these people are the closest friends that he's had. In fact, some of them are David's mighty men. They were around when David killed Goliath. They were around when David won the battle against Saul. They were around when David crushed the Philistines. They were there for all of the high moments of David's life, and as David was being cheered on, they were being cheered on. You see, they had everything to gain from being with King David. In this moment, they have everything to lose. While David is in sorrow, they could have quickly found the exit door to leave. What's fascinating here is this description of David in verse 30, 2 Samuel 15, verse 30. It says this: David was climbing. Think about the topography of this. David was climbing the slope of the Mount of Olives, weeping as he ascended. His head was covered, and he was walking barefoot. And all of the people with him covered their heads and went up weeping as they ascended. You see, up to this point, David is referred to as King David, or the king. There's a specific literary strategy right here where all of a sudden, David is just referred to as David. Why? Because David is no longer just simply a king, but now we're being introduced to the humanity of David. This isn't a king ascending a mountain in glory. It is a man who is wearing the clothes of mourning up the mountain in deep despair and sorrow. Why is David in mourning? David is in anguish because of the weight of his sin. No doubt, as he is considering the consequences of murdering Uriah, of his adultery with Bathsheba, with his failure as a father with Absalom, how he is disconnected as a king from the people. He is ascending the mountain in failure and in defeat and in deep sorrow. And as he is weeping, as he is mourning, all the people with him weep and mourn with him. One of the most powerful things that you can do as a friend, as a faithful friend, is when your friend is experiencing joy, to join them in the joy. But when that friend is experiencing sorrow, it's to sit with them in that sorrow. It's to mourn with them. It's to cry tears with them and for them. It's to be a witness to the depth of their pain and their hurt, and to remind them that even in that, they are not alone. You are with them. You see, there's an interesting detail here that David's climbing the slope of the Mount of Olives. I'm a Bible nerd. You know this by now about me. Instantly, I'm thinking, wait a minute. Somebody else spent a lot of time on the Mount of Olives, didn't he? Like, wait a minute. If the story is actually about King David to point us to the greater King David, then what is Jesus doing near the Mount of Olives? If you look at Luke 19, 37 through 41, this is what it says. Now he, Jesus, came near the path. Look at the topography. Down the Mount of Olives. You've got David, who is ascending the Mount of Olives. But as he ascends in mourning and defeat. And now we're introduced to Jesus, the greater David, in Luke 19. And the details of the text tell us that he's now coming down the Mount of Olives. And look at this. There's a whole crowd of disciples with him. David is not alone. Jesus is not alone. David is on the Mount of Olives. Jesus is on the Mount of Olives. Y'all tell me that the Bible is just randomly made up? Give me a break. Look at this. And it says, the whole crowd of disciples began to praise God joyfully with a loud voice for all the miracles that they had seen. And then they quote the Psalms. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, which, by the way, is a very politically charged message. It was the same phrase that was used when the Maccabees won the revolt against the Romans, and they celebrated the Maccabees as they came in, waving palm branches, saying, Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. The people had expectations for Jesus, and they are praising Jesus. says, peace in heaven and glory in the highest heaven. And some of the Pharisees from the crowd told him, teacher, rebuke your disciples. And he answered, I tell you, if they were to keep silent, the stones would cry out. Now, we would typically quote this one, right? Y'all, if you don't cry, the stones are going to cry out. Let's read the next verse. As he approached the city, remember the topography, he is coming down the Mount of Olives. As he approached and saw the city, Jesus wept. King David ascends the Mount of Olives and he weeps. And he feels the weight of sin. And he sees the devastation of sin. And David can do nothing about it. David is running for his life. And here is King Jesus, who comes down the Mount of Olives. And he sees the city and he weeps because he sees the devastation of sin upon humanity. And as he weeps, he enters into his own death to give his life as a ransom for the life of all of humanity. We could contrast it this way. David is in anguish because of his sin and weeps on the Mount of Olives. Jesus is in anguish because of the sin of humanity and weeps on the Mount of Olives. David walks up the slope of the Mount of Olives in defeat and despair with weeping and mourning in the city as he leaves behind him. Jesus walks down the Mount of Olives in triumphant entry as the people in the city are shouting his praises. David's sorrow is sincere, but it lacks the possibility of redemption. Jesus' sorrow is sincere, but it is sufficient for the redemption of sins on the cross. In the midst of all of this, both Jesus and David are surrounded by, guess what? Faithful friends. Yeah, that faithfulness would be tested. Yes, at times, even the friendships will falter. But there is an underlying faithfulness and presence, and we need this more than ever in times of sorrow. You see, the hat that I brought with me today is, yes, a hat that is depressing because the Bears still are bad. Underneath it, it's signed by my buddy I told you about earlier, Pete Heiniger. We just called him Petey. If you met Pete, Pete was like an actual Viking, like as big as an actual Viking. Pete played D1 football. Pete was a brilliant leader. Most of the most incredible pastors, ministry leaders, ministry organizations that you know of, that you celebrate, that you listen to on social and all this other stuff, behind the scenes was Pete Heiniger, who helped those nonprofits in such significant ways. And Pete was one of my best friends at Logos Bible Software. And when we had left, what's interesting about Pete, when he was playing football, he lost his eye. Wild. He actually lost his eye. So he got a glass eye that was made. Y'all, this is so wild. This is how crazy Pete was. Pete had a custom artist design the Bears logo in the eyeball. This is how serious he was. As I was working on my book, The Hidden Peace, and I had just signed my book contract, Pete had texted me and Maddie, and he said, hey guys, got some bad news. I've been diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. Pete's a fighter. So we go, Pete's going to win this. He's going to fight this. He's going to beat this thing. And he fought. And he's got 4 daughters, and he fought. And after about 4 years, the cancer took him. And I remember his wife had messaged me and Matt and said, hey guys, we're getting close. And if you wanted to say bye in person, this would be the time. So Matt and I jumped on a flight and we flew. They were living in Colorado Springs at the time. We flew into Denver, grabbed a buddy's car, and drove to Colorado Springs. And Pete was in hospice at that time. Big old dude, like huge, muscular, had just shriveled. I've got a picture. I had the incredible opportunity to read a section of my book, of The Hidden Peace. There's a chapter called When Bad Things Happen to Humble People, and in it I tell the story of Pete. And there's this moment that happened because it's an odd thing when you're experiencing death, especially death with somebody that you dearly love. Often, death kind of is a surprise, It happens, you're like, oh my gosh, and you try to process after the fact. When it comes to cancer, it's such an evil thing because you're watching the death happen in slow motion in front of you. And then for us, for Matt and I in this moment, we came and we sat at his bedside, and we watched a football. It was the NFL, it was the playoffs. It was the game that the 49ers lost all their quarterbacks. Like, what in the world? And even in that moment, Pete was like, how did they not have a quarterback? He's dying. And we hugged Pete, said we loved him, said we'd see him again. It was snowing outside, and Matt and I walked out, and we just cried. We just sobbed. And to this day, it is a very difficult thing to think about. The thing that we look back on, both Maddie and I look back on and we think on, is the presence and the proximity of faithful friends in the moment of deep sorrow. There's something in these moments where we lean on when our courage is faltering, when our faith is faltering, when our hope is faltering. We lean on the courage. We lean on the faith. We lean on the hope of faithful friends that sit with us in sorrow and weep with us in loss. Point number 3. A faithful friend's friendship is not conditioned by prosperity or poverty. It's not conditioned by prosperity or poverty. David gets to the top of the Mount of Olives, and he's surprised, and he sees this guy named Hushai the architect. And when he gets up there, Hushai is like, man, I'm leaving with you. And David goes, no, you're not. You're going to go back. There's kind of an interesting detail here about this part of the story is that basically Hushai becomes a spy, which is an odd thing. But I want you to think about the cost to Hushai, the danger that he's put in. He could have easily turned on David, and yet he doesn't. In the text, Hushai refers to David not as King David, but just as David. Well, you have to earn the ability to refer to the king of Israel as just his first name. There's relationship that was taken, and Hushai is referred to as David's Ra'ah in Hebrew. It just means friend, but it's a friend with an honorific title. Here's the 4th point. A faithful friend is proactive, but is also aware of the dangers of presumption. There's this wild story. You get into chapter 16, and there's this guy who comes out to David, and he is related to the house of Saul, and his name is Shimei, and he starts to curse David, right? In Hebrew, like, we can't even say some of the words that this dude is saying. Basically saying, get out, you man of bloodshed, you're a murderer, you're horrible, you're wicked, right? And then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, in verse 9, he says this. He says, why should this... Listen, we all need some friends like this in our lives. I'm just letting you know. Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and remove his head. If y'all don't have a friend who's about to be like, yo, that dude is a dead dog, let me remove his head, what are we even doing anyways, right? It's like, don't mess with my people, because if you mess with my people, I might cut you. You're like, Joel, you're like a pastor and a theologian. Yeah, I've done lots of ministry. Prison ministry is totally open for me. I'm joking. There's something here that I think is just in the humanity of this that I kind of just love. Here's a friend who's like, how dare, and he's like jumping in, and then here's David. So here's a guy, he's proactive, but then here's David. David's like, yo, slow your roll. He's like, I get it, but hold up. And what David basically says is like, we don't know what the Lord is doing. He might be right. So let's be patient. Let's endure. Let's go through this and let the Lord be the one who either vindicates me or affirms what this person is screaming. You see, as a friend, Man, let's be proactive people. Let's come to the defense of our people. But let's be very careful that we don't become presumptuous. And in our presumption, we actually sin against other people. And then the last thing here, it's very simple, but it's what all the other four are just leading up to. A faithful friend is simply present. A faithful friend is simply present. At the very end of this, verse 13 says, "So David and his men proceeded along the road as Shimei was going along the ridge of the hill opposite him. As Shimei went, he cursed David, threw stones at him, and kicked up dust." Verse 14, "Finally, the king and all the people with him arrived, exhausted, so they rested." Sometimes the best thing we can have with our friends after all of this is rest, is to sit and to wait and to be patient on the working of the Lord. In all of this, we find the thing that characterizes these friendships is loyalty. It's faithfulness. It's a commitment not just to a person, but to what that person stands for. Which a whole different message, a different day is, are you that type of friend that deserves this type of loyalty? Are you that friend that has character and substance and integrity? Because if you're not, that's where we have to start. There's no greater example of faithfulness than King Jesus. It would be amiss to get all the way here and to leave with some kind of moralistic message. Be a good friend. Here are 4 ways to be a good friend. Now go on out into the city of Charlotte and be a good friend. That would be amiss. I was even hesitant to even do this. I'm that's not the point of the story. What is the point of the story? The point of the story is to show that as good and as faithful of friends we are, it is nothing compared to the faithfulness of a friend that we have in King Jesus. He is the faithful one, and we pursue his faithfulness. This is what Jesus says in John 15, 12 through 17. And this is the command that Jesus gives us. "This is my command. Love one another as I have loved you." Look at how Jesus frames it. Listen, I'm not asking you to do something I have not done myself. You're to do what I've already done. Love one another as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down his life for his friends. It says, you are my friends if you do what I command you. I don't call you servants anymore because the servant doesn't know what the master is doing. I've called you friends because I've made known to you everything I have heard from my Father. You did not choose me, and that is good news. Why? Because Jesus chose us. But I chose you. I appointed you to go and to produce fruit, and that your fruit should remain, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he will give you. This is my command to you. Love one another. As Brandon and the band come up, I have a simple question for you guys. And I say this often when I'm here with you. It's something that's simple, but it's also far from being simplistic. And the question is, who will you be? As First Baptist Charlotte is located in this strategic spot in the city, a Jesus church for all people, who will you be? Will you be a faithful friend? Will you show loyalty and commitment, and not to Rob, not to the church, but to Jesus? Because he's called you. He's placed you here. He's given you an opportunity. Who will you be? A faithful friend who's present, or a friend who flees at the first sign of trouble? I go back to that scene of Jesus as he comes down the Mount of Olives. And Jesus very well knows what this is going to cost him. You see, David flees the Mount of Olives, and he flees in defeat. He can't do anything about it. But Jesus secures victory through what the world saw was defeat. Jesus lays down his life. Jesus gives us hope. Jesus gives us courage. Jesus gives us the power and the ability to be faithful because we have his Spirit that resides inside of us. If you're like, man, I don't know if I can be faithful, here's good news. And here's honesty. You can't. You know who can? Jesus. You know who will empower and equip you? The Spirit of God. This is an act of dependence. And we are a people who are dependent on the King of Kings, Jesus himself. So who will you be? Simple question, but something that you'll have to live out.